He doesn't belong up there with the real innovators. The words sliced through the champagne-filled air as the elderly man in a worn blue suit stood alone, his calloused hands clutching an invitation that had cost him 3 months' savings. Whispers rippled across the glittering Automotive Awards Gala, expensive colognes and perfumes mixing with the scent of exclusion. James Hartwell, 73 years old, watched from the edge of the marble-floored ballroom as men in custom tuxedos received golden trophies for revolutionary engine designs built on blueprints he had sketched in his humble garage workshop decades ago. Crystal chandeliers reflected off the diamond cufflinks of executives who had never touched engine oil, while the man whose hands had birthed the very technology being celebrated couldn't even approach the hors d'oeuvres table without receiving sideways glances. Near the bar, partially obscured by a decorative pillar, a figure in a simple black suit observed the scene with quiet intensity. Keanu Reeves sipped his sparkling water, watching as the elderly engineer's shoulders slumped further with each announcement. What the actor was about to do would transform not just this evening, but an entire industry's understanding of who truly deserved recognition. The real revolution wasn't happening on that spotlit stage. It was about to unfold from the shadows. James Hartwell had imagined this night differently. For 53 years, he had dedicated his life to revolutionizing automotive engineering, developing innovative combustion timing systems that had increased fuel efficiency by 23% across the industry. His patents, sold for surprisingly modest sums to major manufacturers when his small shop couldn't afford production costs, now powered vehicles worldwide. Tonight's Excellence in Automotive Innovation Gala was celebrating those very advancements, but his name appeared nowhere in the glossy program he now folded and unfolded in his weathered hands. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly 3 months ago. At first he thought it was recognition at last, until he realized it was merely a form letter sent to industry affiliates. He had spent his modest savings on a suit, hoping perhaps to speak with someone about his current project, a breakthrough technology that could reduce emissions by another 15%. Instead, he found himself invisible, a ghost at the periphery of a celebration of his own achievements. Marcus Wellington, CEO of Wellington Motors, tapped his crystal champagne flute as he approached the stage. "Tonight we honor visionaries who've transformed our industry," he announced, his voice amplified through the ballroom. The irony wasn't lost on James as he watched the man who had purchased his third patent for a fraction of its worth now position himself as the face of innovation. The Wellington turbo-efficient engine system has revolutionized how we think about fuel consumption, Marcus continued, gesturing dramatically, as a video montage displayed the very technology James had sketched on graph paper in his garage workshop. Polite applause rippled through the crowd of automotive elites, designers in Italian suits and executives whose closest connection to engineering was signing procurement documents. A young woman in a designer gown whispered to her companion, just loud enough for James to hear, "Who's that old man? He looks like he should be fixing the plumbing." Her companion chuckled, champagne sloshing slightly over crystal. James's face burned with humiliation as he took a step back, bumping into a waiter who gave him an irritated glance. Keanu Reeves, standing now at the edge of the room, noticed the exchange. Most guests hadn't recognized the actor, his presence at an automotive event unexpected. He had been invited as a motorcycle enthusiast and collector, though few knew of his deep technical knowledge of engines. He watched as James retreated further from the crowd, the elderly engineer's eyes still fixed on the stage where images of his life's work flashed on massive screens attributed to others. The disconnect between the celebration and the quiet dejection of the true innovator struck Keanu deeply. He had experienced Hollywood's similar capacity for celebrating the visible while ignoring the essential contributors behind the scenes. The awards presentation continued, each golden trophy accompanied by grandiose language about visionary leadership and corporate innovation culture. James stood motionless as the Wellington turbo-efficient system, his system, received the night's highest honor for environmental impact. Not once was his name mentioned. He clutched the folder containing his newest designs, the ones he had hoped might interest someone tonight, feeling the futility of his presence with each passing moment. "Excuse me, sir." A server approached James with visible disdain. "This area is reserved for invited guests only." The implication was clear. Someone like him couldn't possibly belong. James fumbled for his invitation, embarrassment flooding his weathered face. "He has an invitation," came a quiet voice from behind. Keanu stepped forward, his presence suddenly commanding attention. The server's expression transformed instantly from condescension to recognition. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't—" "Of course, sir," the server stammered, backing away with repeated apologies. The brief exchange drew attention. Whispers rippled through nearby clusters of executives. "That's Keanu Reeves. What's he doing talking to that old guy?" The contrast between how each man was treated despite neither being automotive executives highlighted the hollow nature of the room's supposed meritocracy. What none of them yet realized was that this small interaction was about to escalate into something that would transform the evening, and perhaps the industry's understanding of innovation itself. "Thank you," James said quietly to Keanu, clutching his folder of designs tighter. "I should probably leave. I don't think I belong here after all." "Actually," Keanu replied, his voice carrying the gentle confidence that had become his hallmark, "I think you might be the only person who truly belongs." He gestured to the stage where Marcus Wellington continued his self-congratulatory speech. "That's your work they're celebrating, isn't it? The turbo-efficient system." James's eyes widened with surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" "I've studied combustion engines for years. Motorcycle design is a passion of mine." Keanu smiled, the warmth genuine. The elegance of that timing mechanism could only come from someone who understands engines at their core, not from corporate development teams. "I recognized your name from the original patents when I was researching valve timing systems." Their conversation drew more attention. A small cluster of industry executives had noticed the actor engaged in deep conversation with the elderly man they'd been dismissing all evening. The champagne-induced chatter dimmed as curiosity spread. "That's James Hartwell," one older executive whispered to his younger colleague. "The timing system guy." "Wait, the Hartwell?" "I thought he was dead," the younger man replied, adjusting his designer glasses for a better look. Marcus Wellington, sensing he was losing the room's attention, tapped his microphone. "And now, to present our Lifetime Achievement Award, please welcome our board chairman, Victor Dennison." The elderly chairman approached the podium, scanning his prepared remarks. "Tonight's highest honor goes to a man whose vision has shaped our industry for decades." "Would you show me what you're working on now?" Keanu asked James, nodding toward the folder clutched in the older man's hands. The question caught James off guard. It had been years since anyone had shown genuine interest in his ideas. With slightly trembling hands, James opened the folder, revealing intricate hand-drawn diagrams of a hybrid propulsion system. His voice grew stronger as he explained the concept, decades of passion breaking through his earlier dejection. It combines elements of traditional combustion with electromagnetic assistance, reducing emissions by nearly 40% without compromising power delivery. Keanu studied the designs with genuine fascination, asking technical questions that revealed his unexpected depth of knowledge. Their conversation created an island of authentic engagement amid the superficial networking around them. On stage, Chairman Dennison continued his speech, a man who took Wellington Motors from a regional manufacturer to a global powerhouse. The contrast was striking, a celebration of corporate achievement, while the true innovator stood unrecognized in the corner. But the dynamic was shifting. More executives had noticed Keanu's focused attention on the elderly engineer, curiosity drawing them closer. "That's definitely Hartwell," confirmed an older executive to his colleagues. "His timing mechanism is why Wellington Motors survived the 2008 crash when fuel prices spiked." Marcus Wellington, halfway to the stage to accept his award, noticed the growing crowd around Keanu and the old man. His triumphant smile faltered as he recognized James Hartwell, the engineer whose patents he had purchased for pennies on the dollar, whose name had been deliberately omitted from press releases and technical documentation. "This is revolutionary," Keanu said, his finger tracing the airflow pattern on James's diagram. "Have you shopped this around to manufacturers?" James's smile turned bitter. "I've tried. No one will take meetings with some old mechanic. The industry has changed. It's all about who you know and how you look on corporate videos." Their audience had grown. Engineers, designers, and even a few executives had been drawn by the sight of Keanu Reeves engaged in what appeared to be a detailed technical discussion. The circle widened as more recognized the elderly man at its center. "That's Hartwell's variable timing system in every Wellington engine," a senior engineer whispered to her colleagues. "We're still using his baseline algorithms for the computer models." On stage, Chairman Dennison was building to his climax. "A visionary who personally guided our technical revolution, Marcus Wellington." Applause erupted as Marcus ascended the steps, his custom-tailored suit catching the spotlight. He reached for the crystal trophy with practiced humility, but his eyes betrayed his concern as he noticed nearly a third of the room focused on the growing congregation around Keanu and James. "I believe the greatest innovations come from understanding fundamental problems at their core," Keanu was saying, loud enough now that those nearby could hear clearly. "Not from corporate boardrooms, but from people who've devoted their lives to solving real engineering challenges." The words hung in the air as Marcus tapped the microphone. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," he began, voice slightly less confident than before. "Wellington Motors has always valued innovation above all." As if on cue, someone in the crowd around James and Keanu asked loudly, "Is it true Wellington bought your patent for the turbo-efficient system for just $25,000 when it's now worth billions?" The room fell silent. All eyes moved between the stage and the elderly engineer. Two narratives were colliding, and everyone sensed a moment of truth approaching. The silence that followed felt eternal. Marcus Wellington stood frozen at the podium, trophy in hand, as the question echoed through the ballroom. James looked down at his worn shoes, decades of resignation evident in his posture. "It was $18,500 actually," James finally said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. "It paid for my wife's cancer treatments for almost a year." The raw truth cut through the evening's pretense. Phones emerged from pockets as attendees sensed a moment worth capturing. Marcus cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "While we appreciate all our technical contributors over the years," he began, voice straining for authority, "tonight is about celebrating leadership and vision that transforms ideas into global products." Keanu's hand found James's shoulder, a gesture of support that wasn't lost on the watching crowd. "Perhaps," Keanu suggested, his voice measured but clear enough to carry, "true leadership means recognizing the people whose vision made those products possible in the first place." The crowd's attention swung between the actor and the CEO like a pendulum. The ballroom had transformed from an award ceremony into something more authentic, a moment of public reckoning. A senior engineer near the front stepped forward. "Mr. Wellington, we've been using Mr. Hartwell's designs for 15 years. He should be up there with you." Marcus's knuckles whitened around the trophy. This is hardly the appropriate venue for—" "It's exactly the appropriate venue," came another voice, the company's technical director. "We're celebrating innovation tonight, aren't we?" The balance of power in the room shifted palpably. Camera phones captured everything as Marcus Wellington's carefully constructed narrative crumbled. He looked desperately to his public relations director, who stood helplessly at the side of the stage. "Perhaps Mr. Hartwell would like to say a few words," Keanu suggested, gesturing toward the stage with a gentle deference that made refusing seem impossible. All eyes turned to James, whose weathered face registered shock. For a moment it seemed he might decline, retreat back into the shadows where he'd spent his career. But something was happening around him. Engineers he'd never met were nodding encouragement, and even executives were stepping aside to clear a path to the stage. "Go on, sir," a young engineer urged. "We study your timing diagrams in engineering school." James straightened his shoulders and began walking toward the stage, each step gaining confidence. The crowd parted respectfully. Marcus Wellington stood frozen, trophy in hand, as the true innovator approached. Reaching the steps, James paused. Decades of being overlooked had trained him to expect rejection. But then Keanu's voice carried from the back. "A true visionary doesn't need to announce himself as one." The simple truth resonated through the room. Someone began to applaud, then another and another, until the entire ballroom erupted in recognition that needed no formal introduction. James ascended the steps with dignity, his worn blue suit a stark contrast to Marcus's bespoke tuxedo. James reached for the microphone, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus stepped aside, surrender disguised as courtesy. The ballroom fell silent again, as the elderly engineer gazed out at the industry that had simultaneously relied upon and forgotten him. "I never wanted recognition," James began, his voice finding strength as he spoke. "I just wanted to solve problems. Every engine challenge was a puzzle, and the solutions, they were always there in the metal and math, waiting to be found." His calloused hands gestured as he spoke, hands that had shaped the very technologies being celebrated. "But I've learned something tonight," he continued, glancing toward Keanu, who watched with quiet approval. "Innovation isn't just about the idea, it's about who gets to be seen having the idea, who gets invited to the room where decisions are made." Phones recorded every word as James opened his folder of designs, holding up the diagrams of his newest creation. "I came here tonight hoping someone might see value in this, a hybrid system that could cut emissions nearly in half. I'll never be able to develop it alone in my garage, but maybe innovation should be about more than who can afford the fastest path to market." The industry's most powerful figures watched with dawning recognition of their complicity in a system that prized corporate ownership over authentic creation. Toward the rear of the ballroom, Keanu nodded slightly, a gesture of respect for the truth being spoken. "The future of this industry won't come from boardrooms," James concluded, looking directly at Marcus Wellington. "It never has. It comes from people willing to get their hands dirty with real problems, whether anyone notices them or not." The applause began slowly, building like an engine coming to life, until it filled the room with undeniable force. In that moment, power had been redistributed, not through corporate maneuvering, but through simple, undeniable truth. The gala's carefully choreographed schedule dissolved as James descended from the stage. Engineers and designers surged forward, surrounding him with questions and admiration too long withheld. His diagrams passed from hand to hand, experts marveling at their elegance and innovation. The atmosphere had transformed from a corporate celebration to something more authentic, a genuine exchange of ideas. Marcus Wellington stood to the side, the crystal trophy forgotten on the podium. His public relations team huddled around him, frantically discussing damage control as video clips of James's speech began circulating on social media. The narrative was spreading beyond their control. "We need to issue a statement immediately," the PR director insisted. "Frame this as Wellington Motors rediscovering our founding innovator. Maybe announce a named research division." Marcus nodded absently, watching as James, the man whose ideas had built his fortune, became the center of the very celebration meant to enhance Wellington's personal brand. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor was the opportunity slipping through his fingers. Across the room, Keanu maintained a respectful distance, allowing James his moment of long-overdue recognition. When approached by attendees, he deflected attention back to the engineer's accomplishments with characteristic humility. This wasn't his story to claim. He had merely removed the obstacle blocking its natural telling. By midnight, the videos had gone viral. Real Innovator and Hartwell Engine trended across platforms, with industry influencers sharing the moment when corporate pretense gave way to authentic recognition. Major automotive publications scrambled to publish profiles of James Hartwell, the forgotten genius behind technologies they'd been writing about for years. 3 days later, James sat in a sunlit conference room at Sustainable Transport Initiative, surrounded by engineers and investors reviewing his hybrid system designs. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the gala. Offers of partnerships, consulting roles, and speaking engagements poured in from companies eager to associate themselves with authentic innovation. Marcus Wellington had pivoted quickly, announcing the James Hartwell Innovation Fellowship at Wellington Motors, with considerable financial backing. The corporate machinery had absorbed the disruption and transformed it into brand enhancement. Yet something fundamental had changed. In press releases and interviews, actual engineers were now being named and credited alongside executives. In a quiet coffee shop across town, James met with Keanu, away from the industry spotlight. "I still don't know how to thank you," the engineer said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Everything's changed in ways I never imagined possible." "You don't need to thank me," Keanu replied with characteristic modesty. "You just needed the room to see what was already there." James smiled, looking down at his hands that had shaped metal and ideas for decades in obscurity. "The hybrid system is going into development. They're calling it the Hartwell Drive." Pride tinged his voice, not for the recognition, but for the technology that would finally reach its potential. "The right names matter," Keanu observed quietly. "They tell us who we're supposed to see and who we're allowed to overlook." Outside the coffee shop window, a group of engineering students passed by, one wearing a T-shirt with James's engine diagram printed on it, already an icon of authentic innovation. The world had shifted, if only slightly, toward recognizing the hands that built it, rather than merely the voices that claimed credit. "I've been thinking about all those years in my garage," James said, looking out at the street. "I used to believe the work was enough, that solving the problem was its own reward, and maybe it was. But there's something powerful about being seen for what you've actually created." Keanu nodded, understanding the deeper truth. In Hollywood and Detroit alike, the gap between credit and contribution remained vast. But moments of reckoning, when properly witnessed, could bridge that distance. As they parted ways, James headed toward a meeting with young engineers eager to collaborate on his next project. His step was lighter now, unburdened by decades of resignation. One act of recognition, amplified by the right witness at the right moment, had transformed not just his life, but perhaps the very culture that had overlooked him. The real revolution wasn't in the engine designs. It was in who would be seen creating the next one.